Hello. So the title of this session is Move to STI and Discard the Grey Background Window. But actually, the goal of this session is to impress that actually there's more to making the transition from MDI to STI than simply removing the background window. So hopefully you'll catch that by the end of the session. My name's Keisuke Miyako. I work for the Japanese subsidiary of 4D. Okay, so you're all interested in the new SDI Mode feature. Here's a quick overview of the prerequisites to use this feature. Basically 3 conditions you need to meet. I think the first 2 is okay. You need to use at least a version 16R4. Well, that's fine. You're probably planning to move to v17 at some point in the future. The second condition, again, I guess is reasonable. Most computers, Windows computers, are already running a 64-bit version of the operating system, and you probably understand that you can't stay on the 32-bit version of 4D forever. I guess the real something that might be a problem is the third condition, which is that you have to compile and build your application either as a standalone desktop application or a built client application that connects to a built server application. Now, for various reasons, you might not be building your application at the moment. Perhaps you see the benefits of running an application in interpreted mode. You might want to make some changes on a daily basis. Or maybe you compile your applications, but you don't build an application. That means, at least for now, unfortunately, you won't be able to switch to SDI mode. But the good news is that there are things planned for the near future. When this feature was first announced on the forums, this is what the blog post said. It said, as of now, SDI mode is available only for standalone applications and most client applications on Windows 64-bit. But there was another sentence which said, this is a first step, so it's not the end of the story. More will come in future R releases. And we can't reveal too much about the more, but the first thing I think which will come in very soon is the ability to test your application in SDI mode, because currently, as soon as you make some modifications, you can only confirm the modification by compiling and building and launching the built application, and that can be a tedious procedure. So soon you'll be able to test your application in a kind of a pseudo SDI mode. And then I think there's some nice things planned to make the design mode, at least partially, SDI compatible. Check out the blog posts. Okay, let's do a quick comparison between MDI and SDI, the interface. So what are the benefits of an MDI application? Well, first, you could say that the window ownership is quite clear. You see, we have a main window, a main 4D window, and all the other child windows, with the exception of a movable modal dialog window, is that everything are confined to the boundaries of the main window and actually clipped at the edges. So that's quite clear. And this kind of interface is really useful in what we can call specialized studio apps. And a good example would be Photoshop. You see, that's a real specialized studio apps, and it makes sense to run that kind of application in MDI mode. So what are the downsides? Well, according to the Microsoft documentation, there's a page about MDI. This kind of an interface could be confusing to new users. Now, millennials are now in their 30s. Your users could be as young as in the 20s, and they will find this kind of an application really odd, you see. And so that could be explained as a downside. And compare that with SDI applications. So the benefits, again, is that it is simple and easy to learn. Basically, you have just one window. All the features are within that window. Of course, you can open a second, third window, but still, each window are all self-contained. All the features, all the menus are in the window. There's no kind of an implied relation between a window and another. It's everything clean and simple. But there are some downsides, and again, according to Microsoft documentation, is that this design may not work for complex applications. So the takeaway from this discussion is that it's not as if MDI is old and deprecated and obsolete. No, that's the wrong answer. The answer would be that both are valid options. So you're not forced to go to SDI, and you can stay with MDI if that makes sense in your particular applications. Okay. Now, like I said, you have to build your application in order to run it in SDI mode. So let's go quickly through the process of building an application in SDI mode. Now, as was explained during the keynote, there's a new checkbox in the interfaces page, use SDI mode on Windows. So you're going to click that, and what you need to keep in mind is that this is actually a build setting. In other words, even though this is a database setting, so technically you can build an application, SDI or MDI, and go to database settings and then check or uncheck this option, but you can't change at runtime. Once you've built an application in SDI, then it's SDI forever. You can't go to MDI or vice versa. So even though the option is kind of accessible at runtime, actually this is something that is taken into account when you build an application. And something else you need to know, it's probably maybe obvious, but because this option is only available for 64 application, it is implied that you also check the multi-target compile option, compile your application for 64-bit as well. See? That's something else you need to know. And also, because 4D can now have different levels of database settings. So there's database settings stored in the structure file, but you can also have an external, what we call a user settings file, which is a document on disk, which will override the settings defined in the structure file. And there is a third level of database settings, which is an external user settings file next to the data file. So you can have a setting in the structure file, and there's an external setting next to the structure, and then there's an external setting next to the data file. And you want to make sure to check this option in whichever level of database setting with the highest priority. So if you go to documentation, there's a table which describes the priority. Okay? The user settings next to the data file has the highest priority. So even if you check the option at the structure level, it could be overridden by the other two. So that's just something else you might want to keep in mind. Right, so let's go through the migration process. Now we're going to go and consider several different domains of the user interface, starting from window. Okay, in 4D, you have a choice of very different window types. Okay? And perhaps until now, you might have selected your window types quite casually. You go through the different window types and you think, I'm going to use this one. See? But I think it's very important, especially if you're going to run your application in SDI mode, that you select your window type decisively. And you want to consider three aspects. The first is the role. Now, you might have not really thought about a window role, but from a Windows point of view, a window can either be a document, which means it represents some kind of data. It could be a list form, which represents a current selection, or a detail form, which represents a current record. Either way, a document has some kind of back-end data. And then there's dialogue, which is, it's not really bound to a particular data source. It's just a way to communicate with the user. Do you want to go ahead? Do you want to go this way or that way? And that's a dialogue. And Windows actually makes a very clear distinction between the two roles. And you can see, and the best way to describe that is to look at the taskbar at the bottom of the screen. Every document is represented as an icon in the taskbar, and every dialog, the dialog windows are not in the taskbar. You see, there's a clear difference. And the second aspect is the modality. Now, I included this in the slide because I know some users, some developers kind of use modality for purposes that were not intended for. For example, I know some developers display their main window, kind of a main window, using a modal window. That way, according to the developer, the user can't go to design mode or can't access certain windows because they're behind a modal window. But that's not really the right way to use modal windows. I know that, and what can be really problematic by using a modal window for something that shouldn't be modal is that when you want to display a dialog, for example, a really modal dialog, then you end up having a modal window on top of a modal window, and that's going to be just a cause for headache. So use modal windows only appropriately, only when it's appropriate. And third, you want to look at different features. Now, in SDI Mode, most windows didn't have a menu. No child window would have a menu. And you probably know that some windows have a title bar, some have an icon, and these are very important features when you run an application in SDI. So I've listed all window types available in 4D. So on the left side, you've got all the types available for open window, and on the right side, you see all the types for open form window. Now, if you look closely, the images are actually represent the different features. So the ones that have an icon have an icon in the small the image, and so on. And you'll notice that there are more options available for open window, but really you should be using open form window. There's no reason to use open window anymore. You can decide specifically and position your newly created window using open form window. You can use constants to position them relative to the edge of the screen. And like you saw in the keynote, this command supports dynamic forms, so that's really the way to go. But just for the sake of compatibility, I've included all the options available for open window. Now, like I said, a window, yes, please.
I noticed there's a window type. I thought I knew all the window types, but there's a controller window type with this big, giant, long number. Can you tell me what that is?
Yeah, it's coming up later in this presentation. It's a new window type, actually, specifically added for the SDI Mode features. So stay tuned, right? And actually, you should really usually be using predefined constants. I know some people have experimented with different options that are not documented. I know there's a palette window on Mac with the title bar, vertical title bar, but please don't use anything that's not documented, okay? So these are all the predefined documents, constants. Now, like I mentioned, windows make a clear distinction between a window that represents a document and that which represents a dialog box. So let's just categorize these windows into the different two types. So you can see where, as far as open form window is concerned, 3 types, including the new controller window type, fall into the document category, and the others are modal dialog boxes. And when you look at dialog boxes, you can further separate these into modal or non-modal dialog boxes. So there you go. Okay. Now, you can also look into features. So some windows are fully featured. By that, I mean it has a title bar, it has an icon, okay? And some windows don't have an icon, so there's a difference. Palette, for example, has a very thin title bar, so there's no room for an icon. Something else, yes, some windows can have a menu bar, number 8. So you can really see that the number 8 window, plain form window, should be your go-to window type. And then all other windows have specific purposes. Okay. So the controller window. Now, there are two new constants available for the open form window, which are intended to be used with the SDI feature. Now I'll explain why these are useful from an actual demo. The important point here is that these two constants are available only for open form window. You can't pass it. It will be ignored if you pass it to open window. So again, you could say that open form window is the proper way to use SDI Mode. It fully supports SDI Mode. You can continue to use open window if you use it in the existing application, but there are some features that are not supported that way. Okay, so let's go to the demo. Okay, so here, for the sake of explaining, I have a built application running in SDI Mode on the left side, and the source code is here on the right side. Now, I have a test form which gives you access to all the different window types. Now, as I explained in the previous, during the slides, a document window, so there are three windows that are documents. Notably, the plain window. So if you open a window using the number 8 window type, they are added to the toolbar. Whereas if you open a window that is not a document, so let's say a pop-up. Well, pop-up is not a good example. Palette, okay? Palette. So I'm going to open 2 palettes. They are not documents, so they're not added to the toolbar. Now, if I start closing these, so I'm going to close 1 window, 2 window, and so on. I only have the splash and the test form. And say I closed my test form, then I only have the splash window. Although, no, that's not a good example. Let's, because I was using dialog with an asterisk, so closing the parent form automatically closed the palettes. But the point is, yes, windows that are not documents are not included in the taskbar. Now, sometimes you might be, in some application, you might be using a palette window because they're quite useful. They stay frontmost all the time without becoming the key window. But you might be using a palette to display a document. See, in that case, you can use a controller window. Now, controller window looks exactly like a palette window, okay, except it is actually a document. So that's the only difference. See, so the point here is that if you're using a palette window for a non-dialog or non-tool window, I should say, to display a document, then you can switch from palette to controller with minimal changes to your code. So that's the idea. Perhaps we can talk about menus. So things were very simple in MDI mode. Only the main background window had a menu bar, and that was like the central control center for your application. Now, when you switch over to SDI mode, what happens is that because you don't have the background window, the menu bar is automatically moved to the splash window if you have a splash window visible. Now, in 4D, there is an option to hide the splash window, so I'll explain what you do if that's how your application is designed. But anyway, the main window, the main menu is automatically given to the splash window, so basically you can use the same application with the same look and feel. Now, the difference comes when you start opening new windows, you see. Child window in an MDI application could not have a menu bar, but in SDI mode, some windows can have a menu bar. And the menu bar displayed for those secondary windows can either be inherited from the process or derived from form definition. So the first option, like I said, is that the process menu bar is displayed for your newly created window, if the window supports menus. So here in this slide example, I called set menu bar to install menu bar number 4 for my current process, which means that if I open a new window and a dialog, then the same menu bar will be displayed for that window as well. And you can cascade dialogues. By dialog, I mean the dialog command or add record or modify selection or any window that starts a dialog. Then, again, the newly display form will automatically, because it's the same window, display the current process's menu bar. So that's an example of a window displaying the menu bar for the current process. Now the second option is to not use set menu bar, so you didn't install a menu bar for your process. And what happens in this case is that the menu bar you associated to the form in the property list, in the form editor, that menu will be displayed automatically for the form. Different forms can have different menu bars associated in the property list. In SDI mode, you would have the main menu, and the associated menu bar, called the active menu bar, will be kind of added to the main menu bar. But if you're running in SDI mode, those menu will be simply displayed for each window that you create. So that's the second option. The menu associated with the form in property list is displayed. So that's fairly simple. Now, there is an option to hide the menu bar. Now, in SDI mode, only the main window had a menu bar, so the command naturally only affected the main window, but now the command hide menu bar, show menu bar applies to the current form in STI mode. See? And what's interesting is that whether you display the menu bar or hide it, it doesn't affect the size of the form, because, well, effectively, the menu is like inserted on top of your form, and the title bar, if there is one, but there will always be one, actually, is shifted upwards. So there, the form size does not change. There's another way to not display the menu bar, which is to pass the constant. Oh no, one way is to call hide menu bar, I already mentioned that. Another way is to pass a new constant, form has no menu bar. Now that has the effect of hiding the menu bar by default. You can always show it by code, but perhaps you want to start your form without a menu bar. Now what's important to keep in mind is that a menu bar is functional even if it's hidden. So if you have a keyboard shortcut associated with a menu bar item, it will work regardless of the visibility of the menu bar. See? It's just that it's not visible. Otherwise, you won't be able to do stuff like copy and paste, and that's not good. Okay, I might want to show you some demos here. So here's an example of a window type that does not have a menu bar. You see, movable modal dialog box has a title bar with all these default menus, but no menus for the form. The plain window type has a menu bar, so now we have basically inherited the process's menu bar from here. But there is an option, so I can decide to not display the menu bar by default, in which case the menu, and the image is a bit confusing, but yes, the menu bar is hidden. But it is still functional, so I can still do some shortcuts. I think there was a control 1, 2, oh, maybe it doesn't. Whatever, yeah, there you go. I forgot the shortcuts. Anyway, it works. That's not the point. You can hide the menu bar, that's the point. All right. The functionality of a menu bar actually applies to windows that can never, by nature, display a menu bar. For example, a palette window cannot display a menu bar, but if you've installed a menu bar by, like I said, associating it to the property or calling set menu bar for the process, then the menu bar, even though it does not exist visually, is still functional. And there's a command, menu bar height, and normally, I guess you would use this to, position your window so that it displays at the top edge of your main window in MDI mode. Now, this command is still available in SDI mode, but what you need to know is that the height returned for this command is a fixed value. You see, in Windows, if the width of your window does not allow for every menu item to be displayed in one line, then those items are basically stacked. But the menu bar height will always return the height for a single line of menu items, see? Or 0 if the menu bar is hidden. But you probably don't need to use this command in SDI mode. Okay, let's move on to screens. So as was mentioned in the keynote, one really exciting feature in SDI mode is that the application can now take advantage of multiple connected screens. So how does that affect your code? Now, there are certain commands in 4D, the 4D language, that assumes that there is only one window, the main window. Screen height, screen width will always return the height and the width of the main screen. So you can call these commands on a second screen, it doesn't matter. The height and width of the main screen is always returned. See? And there are constants you can pass to open form window, such as at the top or at the bottom, on the left, on the right, and so on. These, again, apply to the main screen. So let's say you have a window displayed on a second monitor, and when the user clicks a button, you open a second dialog, and the idea is you want to display that window at the center of the screen. Now, you might pass the constants horizontally and vertically centered, but what happens actually is that even though you use the command in a second window, the newly created window will be displayed at the center of the main screen. See? So what you need to do is to use the command screen coordinates to fully process connected to multiple screens, and I'll explain how that works. But before we go into screen coordinates, perhaps I don't know if you've already used this command, convert coordinates. You're going to find this command very useful when you run your application or when you want to deploy your application with the capacity to run on multiple screens. The command basically takes a local coordinate and converts it to a global coordinate, or do the reverse. Now, a local coordinate system is basically the X and Y position relative to the top left of your current window, or the current form, see? Whereas the global coordinate system is relative to the top left corner of the main screen. So that's the important point. So if, let's say you have a second monitor to the right side of the main screen, then the global coordinates will be, the global X coordinate will be larger than the screen width of the main screen. If your second screen is to the left side of the main screen, then the X coordinates will be a negative value. See, it's a global coordinate system. And basically, when you want to position your window on a second or third screen, then you need to pass global coordinates to the command openForm window. And actually, get window rect or set window rect also works with global coordinates. So if you call those commands for the get rect command for a window displayed on a second or third screen to the left or right of the main screen, then you will get some negative values or very large numbers, see, because it's a global coordinate. Sometimes you will use local coordinates, and a good example is when you want to display a pop-up menu. Now, I don't have a second screen, but you can play with the demo if, when you go home and connect the second screen, there's a form that allows you to test the coordinate system, which is written with multiple screens in mind. Maybe it's a bit too small, but yeah, there you go. Menu bar screen, that's obviously 1. Width, height, that's the main screen. Current screen, that's 1. But you will notice that you can get to values higher than 2 if you have more windows connected. Get mouse returns the global coordinates, which is interesting, and you can convert them to local system and vice versa. I think there's a convert command over here. And here we have a dynamic pop-up menu and pop-up menu. They both accept XY coordinates, but there are actually local coordinates. So there's no need to convert to a global coordinate if all you want to do is to display a pop-up menu somewhere relative to an object on your current form. And just for reference, here's one example of a code example to get the current screen. So there's no built-in command that will return the current screen, but you can compute the current screen by using a combination of native commands. And here's one example. See, so first, what I do is I get the window rect of the current full window. Now, like I mentioned, there will be a global coordinates. And then you want to figure out which screen has the largest intersection with that window, because it's possible for a window to be displayed across 2 screens, and in which case there's a dispute as to which one is the current screen. It's the one with the largest intersection. So what I do here is basically compute the intersection area. Now that's kind of an overkill, but it's just I'm trying to look smart and using the new collection command. So in classic, even if you didn't have access to collections, you could still create an array or do a sort array and find the smallest value or the largest value and then do a comparison. But why not? You could just instantiate a new collection object and apply collections methods like max or min, and do a computation to find out which window of all the available screens have the largest intersection with your current window. And that's actually what was done in the demo you just saw a few moments ago. Now, something you probably, well, I did at least, fall into when you start your transition from MDI to SDI is to properly process the termination of your application. In MDI mode, it's quite easy. You just close the main window, and that's the end of your application, or you could call quit 4D. But things are not that simple in SDI mode. So what we did in 4D is that there is a built-in automatic termination mechanism which basically calls the command quit 4D, so your onExit database method will run when certain conditions are met. Now, by certain conditions, I mean, for example, when the splash window is closed. So your application has a splash window and several dialogues running. Now, even though there are other windows still running, if the user closes the splash window, which is considered the main window, then that's the end of your application. onExit is called. Also, if all windows are closed, so there are no more running dialogues, then again, now this specifically applies when the splash window is not used, is that when all document windows are closed, then the application again will automatically terminate. And which brings us to this next slide, which is that your app may not terminate automatically if those conditions that would trigger the automatic termination process are not met. Now, here's an example. Now, let's say, so this is actually the way you saw during the keynote. You have several windows open, so that's how many? About 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 document windows. So I could close each of these, or simply close the splash window, and then the application automatically terminates. Okay? Or it's another. So I'm going to go to my. This is not what I was expecting. You know what? I'm going to build an application right now, see, because it looks like an old version. Okay, no problems. So I'm going to go to, there you go, build. Okay. Why not? Yeah. So the build process is running. I think I had the STI option activated, but let's see. What I'm trying to show is that, remember, some windows don't show up in the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. So what can happen is that you can have a dialog, like a palette window, running, continue to run, even though all document windows are closed, and that can be a problem. So I hope this works. Okay, now, here's a nice example. So did you notice that the splash window is hidden by default? Now, if you have checked the option to display the splash window, then that's fine. There's at least one dialog running as soon as you launch your application. The problem is if you hide the splash window, then by default, there are 0 dialogs, 0 document windows, which means that you immediately meet the condition for the application to automatically terminate. So what you need to do is to open at least one dialog when you don't have the splash window to prevent the application from automatically terminating. And that's exactly what I did here. Okay? So I have 2 dialogs, which is fine. I can also play around with the different window types. See? So let's say now there we go. I have a controller window, several controller windows, and maybe a document window. So that's 4 document windows, right? So I'm going to close 1, 2, 3. So that's the last remaining window. Close, and that should terminate your application. Now I'm going to display. Do I have the task manager? Yeah. Okay, that's good. Now, I'm going to show you an example that would fail, a bad example. So, I hope I've got it right. So, let's say I have a palette window and controller window, okay? Just to keep things simple. So that's 3 windows, and 2 of which are documents. So let's say I closed both 2. So I close this one, and I close this one. Now the system decides that because there are no more dialog windows, there's nothing to show. You see, there's no UI. But as you can clearly see on the window, in fact, the application is still running in the background, basically like a hidden process. And when that happens, the user has no other option but to force quit. There's probably my application somewhere.
What happens if you try to close the window? Does it not close? The palette window.
This one?
Yeah.
Maybe it closes.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay, I could have shown the SDI running in the background, you see? So that's why it's really important to use, be aware of the different roles assigned to a window. So there you are, a document window is displayed in a taskbar. palette is not a document window, which means it's not included in the taskbar. See? And which is basically the reason why the new controller form window was introduced. Okay, let's go through the final application. So, and this section is not really specific to, well, some of them are, SDI window feature, but maybe SDI window is a good reason for you to start building an application. So I want to quickly go through the process of building a final application. Now, when you build an application, basically what you do is merge your structure file with unlimited desktop. And you will notice when you build an application that in the taskbar, by default, it is displayed as 4D unlimited desktop. You see, even if you define the name of your application, and that is because the name displayed in the task manager is actually what we call the file description. See? So it's not the name of your application, it's an internal piece of information called file description. So you need to explicitly define the file description by editing the build XML, build project file. You see, this field is not available in the standard build application dialog, so you need to do that, or otherwise you have 4D unlimited desktop on the task manager. Okay. And the icon, well, you probably know this already, but if you place an icon file adjacent to the structure file with the same name, then that file is automatically used as the custom application for your application, custom icon for your application. Now, until V16, you might know that even if you place a really nice high-def image file, like a PNG, well, like an ICO file with an embedded PNG, it's only the 48 by 48 pixel, which is a very small icon, was used as your custom icon. Now, that has been fixed in a recent version of V16, so you can have a large, good quality icon for your custom application. You just need to create that file and place it next to the structure file, or pass a path to the runtime volume icon path key in the project file. You can also customize the login dialog by, this is a reserved name, placing a login image.png file in the resources folder, and that will display instead of the 4D icon or in your login window. And when you build an application, you might want to remove some items like the components help documents or plugins help from your help menu because these are really for the design mode feature and not something you want to expose to your end user necessarily. So for that, you need to just remove the HTML files from their location when you build an application. You can also customize the help menu, yeah, and by using the set about command. Okay, and one thing is that you should use the set about command before you call set menu bar on your main application process, because set about actually modifies the menu bar, which means that you, well, actually, if a menu bar is already installed, then a set about cannot immediately change what is already displayed, the help menu, which is already displayed in the application. So that's just something else you might want to keep in mind. Okay, I have less than 10 minutes, so maybe it's a good time to take some questions, and then if there's still time, then I'll go back to explain some minor details. Yes, please.
I've just recently added support for multiple screens to my application, of course on the Macintosh side, which is working fine and using the screen coordinates and you're using of collections to determine where the window was. I wish I'd had that because it takes a lot of for loops and a lot of math to come up with what you did in like 2 lines with collections. But of course on the Windows side, screen coordinates doesn't do anything when you've got multiple screens. It doesn't seem to work the same. When you turn on SDI, if you're building an application that works on both Mac and Windows, is it going to function, are the commands going to now kind of be in parity where they kind of work the same, or are you still going to need two different sets of code? I'm running on Mac OS, so I need to do Windows this way. I'm running on Windows, so I need to do window positioning and coordinates and things this way.
No, precisely. Screen coordinates has been updated to work exactly the same on both platforms. Well, in particular, when on Windows side, when the application is running in SDI mode.
Great, wonderful. That's what I wanted to hear. So we don't need special. The code works the same on both operating systems now.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
There's no command, built-in command that tells you whether, if your application is actually running in SDI mode, but there's a way to do that. Maybe I've got it somewhere. Yeah, it's basically if you get the coordinates of the main window, then it will return 0, 0, 0, 0 when the application is running in SDI mode. That's a way to figure out whether your application is running in SDI mode. Yeah. Were there any other questions? Yes, please.
Keisuke, this morning you showed that from the menu you opened an Excel file, and then I got the data from the 4D database using REST, I believe. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure, if it works. So what was that? That was like, the demo is running on the screen. There you go. I think that was the count of that one. So I did something like this, didn't I? Oh, yeah, it's not working. Oh, well, that's fine. It's actually using a third-party library called, what's the name? I didn't write it, so maybe I can just zoom here. It's an open source project called VBA Tools, which is like an HTTP client written in VBA, or VB for applications, which is the programming language you would use in a spreadsheet. So that was doing the REST call from the spreadsheet to my 4D application. Now, I'm not sure if that's the best way, but that was just a choice I made for the sake of this demo. So you can go and find the project. It used to work on both platforms. I was very impressed by that. It worked because XL on Macintosh now supports VBA, but things have changed in the latest version, so it might not work on Macintosh anymore. But yeah, if you're using Windows, and it's a cool way to implement an HTTP client in the spreadsheet. I've got a few more minutes, so maybe I can just quickly demo, just to prove that it was actually working. Yeah. So I'm going to restart my application. There you go. And no? Oh, there you go. Oh, let's see. No. Something. Oh, I know why. Yeah. Yeah, but the source code, at least for this spreadsheet, is actually included. It's a firewall setting. Is included in the USB key, so you might want to have a look. It's using VBA to call REST. That's the answer. Any other questions? Okay then. Well, that's the end of my session. I hope you found it useful.